Hello, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. My name is Mike Coleman. I am a developer advocate on the Lightsail team here at Amazon Web Services, and we are going to talk today about deploying and scaling your first cloud application. So if you have thought about moving into the cloud, but you're not sure where to start, we're going to show you kind of an easy path forward to get your first multi-tier application running in the cloud. We're going to do that by following this agenda here. So we're going to start out with a real quick overview of what is Amazon Lightsail. When you choose Lightsail among the myriad of tools that Amazon Web Services has to offer, we'll then dive into how you use Lightsail load balancers and databases, and you do that in concert with sort of deploying a multi-tier application and then scaling that application both horizontally and getting ready to scale it vertically. So we'll kind of cover the full gamut. It's going to be, I hope more demo than slides. So we're going to just go through and do a bunch of demos and a few slides to back those up. So let's get through our first bit of slides and then we'll get into our first demo. So Amazon Lightsail is a service that we introduced a little over 2 years ago. And it is, the way we talk about it is it's the easiest way to get started on Amazon or in the cloud. I think of Lightsail as being ideal for people who are an expert in something, but that something isn't cloud infrastructure management. Although we have a lot of experienced AWS users that use Lightsail for a variety of different sort of quick projects, most of our users are people who are relatively new to the cloud. And we aimed Lightsail at those folks by kind of making it easy to launch, easy to manage, and easy to grow. So with launch, and you'll see that, you can get started in a couple of minutes. Today, we're going to focus on deploying a custom application, but you can launch WordPress in less than a minute. You can launch Magento or Drupal or any number of different blueprint applications we have really quickly. The other thing that we wanted to address was sticker shock. So some people get into AWS, they're not used to the sort of pay-as-you-go mechanisms, so they get a little surprised when they get the first bill. With Lightsail, everything is low predictable pricing. You'll never pay more than $3.50 for the smallest instance size or more than $15 a month for the smallest database size. And I want you to be able to build an application and know what that's going to cost you as you put it in production. We've also taken the AWS console and we've optimized it. So we've got a console that focuses exclusively on the functionality that we offer. We do that and it has a nice sort of look and feel to it, makes it really easy to get into and start working immediately. But if you are someone who doesn't want to use the console, you'd rather use the API to write your own application to provision cloud services using Lightsail, or you want to use the command line interface to do stuff from the console, both of those are full options. We have a full API and full command line interface support through the Amazon CLI. So once you get stuff up and running, you can manage those resources however you see fit. And then finally, grow. This is the idea that you can easily scale and grow whatever it is you start in Lightsail. So the last thing we wanted to do was have a service that sort of locked you into that service. So we have worked over the last couple of years, culminating with a release this past December at reInvent, the big AWS conference, where we released a feature to export Lightsail instances into EC2. And so we'll do that today, or we'll talk about it, where you start in Lightsail, but for some reason you need to move into full AWS. Well, you can do that. We'll show how you can do that with our demo application today. The other thing too is we'll also show is that if you want to leave certain components in Lightsail, so let's say you're running your web front end, that can run in Lightsail, but you want to connect to an RDS database. That can be running in AWS, and you can do that as well. So we're going to kind of go from running all in Lightsail to running some stuff in Lightsail and some stuff in AWS to migrating everything to AWS. So when do you choose Lightsail? Well, the first is, we're going to deploy a fairly simplistic multi-tier application today. And if those applications are pretty small scale, handful of instances, maybe 3 or 4 on the front end, database with high availability, a load balancer. If you think 6 to 10 instances, that's probably where is a great fit for Lightsail. Websites. So we have a bunch of people that deploy WordPress, for instance, or Apache servers, or whatever it is. Lightsail has bundles available to make it easy for you to get started there. Web apps. So sort of like the small scale multi-tier app, you can run your web apps on Lightsail. And then I mentioned earlier that we see a lot of sort of, larger, maybe more sophisticated, I guess, for lack of a better word, AWS users who use Lightsail for testing environments. So they want to jump in and they want to spin up an instance really fast and try something out. They absolutely can do that with Lightsail. It's really great for that. You can build something in Lightsail and in sort of this enclosed Lightsail virtual private cloud or VPC as they're referred to, and you can then export that in EC2 when you're ready to go into production. We can also run pretty much anything that you can install into Linux or Windows. So Lightsail supports Linux and Windows. If we don't have a blueprint for it, you just need to install the software as you normally would inside of a regular server or a virtual machine. So if there's a line of business application that you want to run, you can do that. Like, for instance, or any other software. So the example I always give is that we don't have Docker containers, Docker support in a Lightsail blueprint. But if you want to run Docker, you can. You just install it into the instance, and you're good to go. So, a little aggressive there on the clicking. So, the opposite of small scale multi-tier apps would be large scale multi-tier apps. So if you've got to have dozens of instances and you want auto scaling and some of the advanced features that come with EC2 and some of the other services, you probably want to use AWS or EC2 for that. Workload dependent instances is just a long way of saying, well, I guess it's not really that long way of saying, another way of saying workload optimized. So people will ask me, can I do machine learning in Lightsail? Yes, you can, but we use a general purpose instance. And so it may not be optimized for that, or big data, or HPC, or, I need a GPU for whatever it is I'm doing. Those sort of very specific instances, probably better off running that in EC2. You could run some of that stuff in Lightsail. It just would not be the best way to do it. You'd want to optimize, and the best way to optimize would be to run a sort of workload specific instance. Advanced networking. So with Lightsail, we are opinionated, which means to say that we, the Lightsail team, we built a service that we've made some decisions for you to make it easier to run. That means there's a degree of flexibility that you don't find in AWS as a whole. So, for instance, our firewalls don't allow you to specify what incoming IP addresses can access a service. It's either on or off to the internet. That's just one example. Our load balancers load balance port 80 and port 443. They don't load balance any other ports. So if you need some additional flexibility there, you probably want to go with EC2 and some of the resources, or AWS, some of the resources there. Specific to databases, Lightsail does have support for databases. One thing Lightsail does not support, though, is this idea of read replicas. So, for instance, if you put your application running and you put your database in Lightsail and you're like, wow, I'm 85% reads and I want to scale that out, you might want to do some read replicas. Well, you can't really do that with Lightsail. You need to use RDS for that. So that's an example where you might leave your web front end running in Lightsail, but it's going to connect to a database running in AWS, for instance. So what we're going to deploy today is a very simple application. It's a to-do list, right? So we're going to go through 4 phases, right? So this application has a PHP-based web front end, and it has a MySQL database on the back end. And we're going to start out by just deploying the application into a single Lightsail instance. So the database and the web browser or the web front end will be in the same instance. Then we're going to go ahead and change that architecture so that it is a web front end running in one instance and a database in another on a Lightsail instance, a Lightsail database instance. And then we're going to go ahead and scale that front end up. And then in the last phase, we're going to look at moving that application to RDS and EC2. So we're going to go monolithic, then we're going to break it apart, and then we're going to scale it, and then we're going to move it. So in the first phase, which we're going to jump into here in a second, the first demo, we're going to go ahead and create a Lightsail instance. We're going to clone our application code in, and we're going to configure the front end to talk to the database. Now, this third step, configuring the database connectivity, this is, of course, going to be specific to the application that we're using as our example here. It's not a Lightsail thing. It's an application-specific thing, so you would need to configure your own application however that works for you. So when we're done, what we end up with is, as I mentioned before, we have a single Lightsail instance by this orange box on the outside, and the web front end, the PHP front end, and the local MySQL database are all on that same machine. And then you access it over the internet. So let's go ahead and jump over to the Lightsail console, which is right here. And this is where you do all the work. Now, I have already created some of the infrastructure for us because I wanted to speed things up. So, but I'll show you how I did that. So this is the front end instance. This is we created that by coming over here, click create instance, scroll down. Now here's those blueprints I mentioned. So I have Node, I have LAMP, I have Mean, Nginx, Magento, all kinds of different choices. We have those for both Windows. We have Windows Server as well as SQL Express. And then you can do, like I said, if you wanted to do a line of business application running on either Windows or Linux, you could pick your distribution here and then install that manually. But we're going to do a LAMP application. Now, LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So we're going to use a Linux operating system with the Apache web server. We're going to use MySQL for the database and PHP to render the website, to do the dynamic front end. And all of that is already installed for us in this blueprint. So we don't have to do anything as far as getting it ready to run. We'll come down here, as I mentioned, $350 a month. Notice first month free. You can sign up for free. And we go all the way up to $160 for 32 gigs of RAM, 8 virtual CPUs, 640 gigs of storage, and 7 terabytes of data transfer. If you never go over the data transfer limit, that 7 terabytes in a month, you'll never pay more than $160, or never go over a terabyte, you'll never spend more than $350. So we can give this a name, right? And then we click create instance, and that instance would be created for us. I've already done that. I've already done that for the database too. So for the database, it's the same thing. You can pick your version of MySQL. You can pick a high availability plan, which is an active, passive, resiliency. We set up 2 servers on the back end so that you're resilient against failover or failure. So you have failover, and we give it a name, and that's it. So, and we click create database. So that's how easy it is to both create an instance to run your application and a database. The other thing we created earlier was a load balancer. And so if I came in here and say create load balancer, you just basically give it a name and click create load balancer. Load balancers cost $18 a month regardless. That's the fixed price for load balancers. All right, so that's how you go and create the infrastructure. Very simple. Now let's talk about getting the application installed. So I'm going to go in, and I've already set up a console session into my Lightsail instance. And the first thing I need to do is, if I go to this website here, what you're going to see is that by default, there's this website already running, and we don't want that, right? We want to go ahead and remove that. The document, the root of the web server is this htdocs directory, and I'm just going to remove everything from that directory. So now if I, now I don't have a website, so I need to put my application code onto the server. So I'm going to do that with git clone. and I'm going to clone my application code into this machine. So now my code is on this machine. I need to do one more thing to kind of get the application ready. All configuration information on how I configure and connect to my database is in this config.php file. But best practice says you shouldn't put those configuration files in the root of your web server in case someone is able to get to that and open that up and find your password. So we're going to go ahead and move that into another directory. All right, I did a lot of typing there and I didn't talk about what I was doing, but let me tell you. So I made this directory called configs, one level up. So you can see it right here, and there's the HT Talks directory. So that's where my web server lives. This is where my configuration lives. I did something called change ownership, and basically I wanted to make sure that the account under which Apache runs could read that file. So that's what this does. And then I just copied the config file up there. So let me change into that directory. Clear the screen here, and we'll cat that file out one more time. All right, so what I need to do here is I need to change this file to connect to my database, right? So let's go ahead and edit that. Now, before I do that, the one thing I don't know is the password. And all of these Bitnami images, Bitnami is the company that creates these blueprints for us, they store the password in a file called Bitnami application password, and it's unique for every instance. So if you use this LAMP blueprint, you're going to need that password. That's where you get it. So I can now edit this file. So because we're going to use the local instance, and username for this is root, and we'll put that password in, right? And so that is telling my web server how to connect to my database. So my web application looks for this file, reads these variables in, and it connects to the database. So we should be able to just write this out. We should be able to connect to that database. So yeah, we're just testing out. We can't connect to our local database. So let me clear out of here. So let me come back to my web server. And if I refresh this, I actually need to go to, all right, so I've created my database and connected to it. Now here's the application running. So let's add a task. And we'll just add that in there. You'll see why I did that in a second. So the application's running. You can see that the database is here on the local host, and we're good to go continue on. So that was the first demo. And what we did, let me back this up a slide, is we created the Lightsail instance, we cloned in the repo, and we edited that config.php file. Now, we have the application running, and it looks like this: single instance, web front end, local database. There's a problem with this. I'm just going to pause here for a second, let you guys think about it. Think to yourself, what are some of the issues with this architecture? Like, why would you not want to put this in production? Well, first of all, it's a single point of failure. You have one instance. So if that instance goes down, then you don't have, your web app goes away. There's also no way to really handle increased demand. So if your web front end gets hammered, you have no way of scaling that out because the database and the web are running on the same instance. So you can't just clone that instance because then you've cloned your database. So you don't really have the right architecture to do that. So what we need to do to fix this is we need to go ahead and separate the database from the web front end. we need to go ahead and create multiple front-end instances, and we need to add those behind a Lightsail load balancer. So let's go ahead and do those things now. And when we do, well, oh, actually, sorry. When we do, what you're going to have here is a new architecture that looks like this, right? So you're going to have, oh my goodness, it looks like this. So you have the PHP instance running, and you have the Lightsail database running, and they're on their own instance. So they're in the Lightsail virtual private cloud, but this is its own instance, and this is its own instance. So they have been we have separated them. So let me tell you just real quickly a little bit more about Lightsail databases before we go on. And the first, so what we've done with Lightsail databases is we've taken the relational database service from AWS, RDS, and we again have optimized that for people who aren't experts in databases. We're going to give you an easy way to stand up and manage MySQL databases in both standard and high availability options. So resilient to failure with the high availability option by placing two instances running in concert in what's called an active-passive configuration. One of them is the primary database. The other one just sits there and takes all the same updates and is ready to fail over in, within seconds if the first one goes away. We have 4 different instance sizes. You can make them accessible via the internet or only on your own local network. We automate the backups for you. We do that every 5 minutes. We take a snapshot, and they're fully managed. You never have to worry about patching or managing the database engine or the underlying software. It makes it super easy to use databases. So let's go ahead and do our next demo and see how that looks. So if we come here, and we go to the Lightsail databases page. I've already created this earlier. We're going to need 3 pieces of information to connect to this database. Now, the first is we need to know the name of the host, which is this right here. So we're going to copy this, and the username is dbmasteruser, and the password is tasks. Okay, so you can probably guess what we're going to do, but what we're going to do, for those of you who haven't guessed, is we're going to edit our configuration file, and we're going to come down here, and we're going to change the username, the host, and the password. And the password was tasks. So Lightsail database up here for the host name. You can tell this is a Lightsail database because it starts with the LS right here for Lightsail. But as I mentioned before, it's based on RDS, so you can see the RDS over here. But this is the Lightsail version. dbmasteruser is the username, and task is the password. So we'll write that out. Now, if I come back over here to my to-do list, you'll notice something, which is there's no tasks to display. Why is that? Because I have switched from looking into the localhost database where we created that task earlier, and I'm now pointing at the Lightsail database. And here's that database instance. So that's all it took. You create the Lightsail database, you edit your configuration file to point to that database, and now you have a highly available database backend backing up your application. So the other part that was not handled was how do you scale the front end and give your front end some resiliency? Because if you think about it right here, you've got a redundant back end for your database, courtesy of Lightsail databases, but your front end is still a single point of failure. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to put that front end behind a load balancer. So we're going to do that by using 2 different features. The first is snapshots. Because the front end is stateless, there's nothing stored in that front end other than a static configuration of how to connect to the database. Nothing is unique. We can basically create a backup or a snapshot of that front end and then create additional instances from that snapshot. So it's going to be super easy for us to go from 1, in our case, to 3, but you could do 5 or 7 or 10 front-end instances. Now, this is where people will invariably ask me about auto-scaling and whether or not Lightsail has auto-scaling. And at this point, it does not. It's a highly requested feature, but it's not one that we have. So if you wanted to add or remove instances from your load balancer, you would have to do that manually. So once we create the snapshots, we're going to create a Lightsail load balancer, and we're going to add the instances to that load balancer. So Lightsail load balancers are basically a very simplified implementation of the load balancers that you find with EC2 in AWS. You can literally set one up with a single click if you don't want to change the name of it. We also make it easy to integrate SSL certificates, but one of the limitations is we only handle traffic on HTTP and HTTPS, right? So ports 80 and 443. So that's sort of the limitations of the load balancer. So when we're done, what we're going to do now is we're going to create the load balancer, which we showed you earlier. So we've done that. Oops, sorry. We're going to snapshot the web front end. We're going to create 2 new instances from that snapshot and place them behind the load balancer. If you had a domain, you could also create a record for the load balancer, which I will show you as well because I have my domain managed here. So when we're done, we're going to have a Lightsail load balancer. We're going to have 3 instances running the front end, and we're going to have a managed database on the back end. So let's go ahead and go through that process. So we'll come over here and let's go home. So here is that web front end. To create a snapshot, I would just come in here and I would say manage, and I would say snapshots. And I would give it a name and I'd click create snapshot. That's it. So it's going to create that snapshot. Now, because I wanted things to go a little bit speedier, I've actually already done this earlier. So I've got this front end snapshot here, and I'm going to go ahead and actually, no, never mind. I am not going to do this. We're going to wait for this to finish. And this will take a little bit of time. While we're doing that, let's go ahead and look at how we can create the DNS record for our load balancer. So if I come back in here in networking, I've got this domain here. This is my personal domain. Now, this domain is not running on Route 53 by Amazon. It's actually running with another provider that I had before I joined AWS about a year ago. And so my point being is that you can manage DNS in Lightsail, whether it's running on AWS or somebody else, right? So if I wanted to create a record here for the load balancer, all I have to do is come in here and say manage. And let's say I want to add a record and we want to call it to do. And we'll call it a CNAME record, CNAME record. And we're going to go to do. And I can come in, and we can come in here and we just pick the load balancer right from the list, right? So let me delete that. So it's right here in the list is that load balancer. Click that and click it. And then, it'll take a little bit of time for that to propagate through the DNS system in the internet, but that's all it takes is 2 clicks, right? To make it so that I can visit my application at todo.mikegcoleman.com and it will resolve out to our load balancer. So let's go and see how we're doing on our snapshots. All right, so we have a snapshot still being created. So let's just give that a couple of seconds here to finish up. All right, so let's check on that snapshot, and it says it's ready. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to say create new instance. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to give it a name. Create that instance. And let's go back to our snapshots. And we got this, and we'll say create new instance. And call this one php-fe3. And give those a couple seconds to get up and running. And then we'll be able to load them into our load balancer and check everything out. All right, so those instances have been created. If I go in, I just want to show you something really quick. If I come in here and hit Control C and Control V, oh, this is embarrassing. It takes a few seconds sometimes for the instance to come up after it says it's running. So right now it's running, but it's booting up the web server, it's booting up the PHP application and get everything up and going. So let's try this again. Okay, give it a second here to try again. While this is happening, I'll go into the next part. So I've got 3 instances, and I want to come back into networking, and I want to put them behind my load balancer. So if I come in here and say target instances, they're all listed here. So we'll take that first one and attach it. And then we'll go and grab the second one and attach it. And we'll go ahead and grab that third one and attach it as well. So these are all there, they're being attached. Notice this says health check passed. So a health check is a way for the database, or excuse me, a way for the load balancer to make sure that your instance is actually up and running and that it should route traffic to that instance. You wouldn't want a load balancer sending requests to an instance that can't respond to them. So if you go back to our diagram, what happens is I visit the website, and the web request comes into the load balancer, and the load balancer goes through a round robin algorithm and routes my request to one of these 3 instances. So I come in, and if one of these is bad, I wouldn't want the load balancer to route to that bad instance. And that's what a health check does. Now, the health checks in Lightsail are pretty rudimentary. We basically look to see if we can reach your website on port 80 and get a response. If we can, we're going to say that's healthy. Now, if you need a more detailed health check, you can write your own health check into your application and specify a health check endpoint that you can configure here, and that we'll visit that. So maybe you have some code running in the background, and it checks to make sure that the database is up, and it checks to make sure that the load is right, and it writes a status out to a certain URL, right? So webserver.com/health. You could configure that here, and the Lightsail instance would look for a healthy response, or excuse me, the Lightsail load balancer would look for a healthy response at that endpoint. So what I wanted to show you before I show the load balancer working is just that if I come to this instance and put that in, so notice that this IP is 251. Notice that this one is 82, and notice that this one is 37. So each instance has its own IP, and if I add a task, make dinner reservations, it's Valentine's Day, and we'll just say I want to go to Les Cirque. And we'll just go ahead and add that task. And if I go back to any of these instances and refresh them, that task shows up at any of those instances because they're all connecting to the same database, right? So the database doesn't change. Now, with the load balancer, we can come down here, grab this address, and notice as I refresh this IP address will change. Sometimes takes a few seconds there. So it went from 37 to 251, back to 37 to 251 to 82. So it's bouncing between each one of those instances. If one of those instances was to fail, it just wouldn't route traffic to it. So you at this point with, we've been we've been working here for about 20 minutes, and we now have a fully fault tolerant, scaled out web application. We've got 3 web front ends. We have a managed database on the back end, high availability through Lightsail, and we have it all behind a load balancer. That's pretty powerful. And as you could tell, I know it's a little bit to take in because of the app configuration and some of that stuff, but just realize that the steps were pretty simple. We created an instance, we added our code to that instance, we created a database, we had our application talk to that database, we then created a snapshot of our web front end, deployed 2 more instances, and put them behind a load balancer. And that's what gets us to here. So now, what would you do in a situation where maybe you're running your website and you realize that you just need bigger instances, right? Well, you can upgrade those to EC2. So we'll show you how you can upgrade your instances and move them very easily from Lightsail to EC2. And you do that using snapshots, technology you just looked at. That's another way of using snapshots. But first, let's talk about how we can move this database into RDS. So we're going to launch an RDS instance, which I've already done. We're going to go ahead and set the security group up so that it can communicate to the Lightsail VPC. We're going to make sure that the Lightsail VPC is peered. Now, I keep using this term VPC, and I've defined it as a virtual private cloud. But what that basically means is, if you think about it, it's a virtual data center in the cloud, right? It's a virtual private cloud. You can take AWS, and within your AWS account, you can create these different virtual private clouds, and they are sort of these autonomous computing entities. And so resources inside of them are sort of isolated unless you peer the VPC with another VPC, or you access that resource by going out to the internet and coming back into the VPC. So when we talk about VPC peering, we're basically saying, hey, here's a virtual private cloud and on one side, and here's another one on the other side, and we're going to connect those 2 things up. And then we can migrate our data and connect the front end to RDS. So let's go ahead and let's talk about EC2. So with EC2, you snapshot the Lightsail instance, you create an EC2 instance with the export to EC2 wizard, and then you connect the EC2 front end to the previously created RDS database. So let's take a look at how that works. So, what we're going to end up with is, at first, what we're going to do is we're going to have our default AWS virtual private cloud. You're going to have, when we end up, we're going to have the EC2 instance running in the VPC and RDS running. So let's go ahead and switch back to our website. I'm going to close these down because we've got a lot of tabs open. And let's take a look at our RDS instance. So our RDS instance here, we have one of them, and it was configured, pretty straightforward configuration. We're not going to go through that in the interest of time, but what we care about are 2 things. We're going to need this endpoint, and we're going to need to modify the security group. So the security group says, who can talk to my instance? Well, right now, my Lightsail VPC cannot. But if I was to, click the wrong button. If I was to come in and I want to add another rule, and I scroll down, and remember I said 172.26.0.0/16. That is the IP address range for all Lightsail VPCs, right? Because they're all isolated, they don't need to have different IP address ranges because it's just the private IP address for the resources running inside that VPC. So I'm going to save that. What I've basically said here is, if traffic comes from my Lightsail virtual private cloud, let it talk to my RDS instance. So we're going to click Save. Now I need to come into Lightsail here, and I need to come into my account, and I need to verify that VPC peering is enabled, and it is. So in the Oregon region, resources in the Oregon region for Lightsail can talk to my Lightsail or my default VPC in EC2. right? So I have EC2 here, excuse me, RDS. So, man, I am sorry about that. Got a little tongue-tied at that point. So what we need to do now is we need to come back over to here, and we're going to come down here, and we're going to change the host name. Now, one of the things I did to make this easier on myself is I use the same username and password for that RDS instance, right? So it's the same as what I was using for Lightsail. So that's why I'm not changing those. So if I click this out and I come back over and I go to my first instance here, because that's the one I was just editing, and I paste that in, notice there's no tasks because I'm connected to a new database, right? I'm connected to the RDS database. So what we've got here is we have got a Lightsail-based front end talking to an RDS instance running in AWS. So we've paired those two things together. We have the front end running on Lightsail, the back end running on RDS. Now, if you wanted to run this instance and in EC2, the next thing you need to do is you'd need to snapshot it. So we'd come down here, we'd manage it, we'd say snapshots, we'd create a snapshot, and that snapshot would have the configuration of that instance pointing to RDS. So if I come back, I did this earlier for a different instance. If I come back, what you end up with then is this instance here. So this is a snapshot of an instance configured to point to the RDS database. From here, I could say export to Amazon EC2. We click yes, we acknowledge that, and we go off and we get this thing saying, hey, we're now exporting to EC2. Now this takes a few minutes, so I have done this earlier, and I'm going to come down now that I have, what this does here is it creates a new Amazon machine image, or an AMI, which is basically an image of that instance that is ready to be instantiated in EC2. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say create a new EC2 instance. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to do it through the console. But while I'm here, we can create the instance by following the steps on this page. The reason I'm not doing that is because I need to make sure that I create my instance in my default VPC in EC2. And this method does not allow me to do that. So I will use the other method, which is through the Amazon console, the EC2 console. So we'll come in here and we can see we've got an instance here. We can click launch and we would go through and configure the details. So see how different this is than creating a Lightsail instance. There's a lot more options, a lot more things. The one thing I definitely want to add here is I need to be able to get web traffic from the internet under this instance, right? So we say review and launch, tell it we have an EC2 key pair, and then launch the instance. So that's going to go off and launch the instances running over and it's going to create the instance in EC2. So come over here into EC2, and you can see this one here that it's pending. I have started one earlier, so let me take a look at this one. Now, the one thing we have to do to make sure that this instance can talk to the RDS instance is make sure that it can that the security group for RDS has this allows for traffic from this instance. So what we can do is we come over here to the security group, we grab the security group ID here. So this is the security group ID of the EC2 instance. We need to go back over to RDS and come back over here to this. This will look really familiar, and click on here, and we're going to edit the security group. And what we're going to say is we're going to edit it and we're going to add another rule for MySQL Aurora traffic on 3306, and we're going to say allow anybody that any instance that is part of this security group can talk to this database. So we're going to save that out. Now, if that worked the way I expect it to, we should be able to come over here to this instance, grab its IP address, and we should be able to access the database instance. And we can. So just to prove there's nothing funny going on here, this is the internal IP address. If I go back to EC2 Management Console, it matches right here, 221, 221. So what we ended up with there at the end was our Lightsail database and our Lightsail front end had been migrated into EC2 and RDS. So now my application, which was once running in Lightsail, is now running in full AWS, as I refer to it. And you can now do all kinds of different things with it. You can use a more powerful load balancer. You can increase the instance size to something bigger than we offer in Lightsail. You can enable read replicas on the database, all of those features that we don't have in Lightsail. The purpose of that last demonstration there was to show you that you could start in Lightsail and you could leave that application running. As a matter of fact, we have a bunch of customers who never migrate their applications out of Lightsail. But we do on occasion have customers that find cause to make a change. And as you can see, I made that change in about 5 minutes. Super easy to do. So you ended up, as a refresher, with the Lightsail default AWS VPC having our PHP instance in EC2 and the database in RDS. And all we had to do was a couple of clicks. So I want to leave you, want to leave you with a couple of resources. If you want to use my application to try this out, it's at github.com, mikegcoleman/to-do-php. If you want to run through the workshop, you can get it at lightsailworkshop.com. So let me leave that up for you. You can visit that lightsailworkshop.com website and try the instances out, try everything we just did here, there, and with step-by-step instructions. So if I, real quick, I know we're getting close to time here, but this is that website, and you can go through and step-by-step everything we did today in the lab, in the demo you can do here in your own Lightsail account. All right, with that, thanks for your attention. We definitely have some time for questions. So remember, the questions should go in the Q&A dialog box there in your interface, and we will take those now.